The absence of faith is not what hurts the most. It's the absence of the possibility to express it. In that place, prayers are not spoken aloud. They exist only in the internal space between one thought and another, hidden behind eyes that pretend to carry nothing but routine. You don't see temples on the corners. You don't hear hymns coming from open windows. The sacred has been replaced by posters, slogans, and surveillance. It's not a spiritual silence. It's a forced silence, imposed, necessary for survival. Children grow up without knowing what it means to celebrate something that transcends the state. Their drawings speak of official heroes, their songs sing of determined victories, and their eyes learn to turn away from symbols that were erased from books, from walls, from public memory. But there are memories that refuse to be erased. There are elders who still remember the sound of bells, the whispered reading of sacred texts, simple gestures that today would cost freedom. And because of that, even silent, they resist, even if only internally. Surveillance does not sleep. Every neighborhood has eyes that do not blink. Every building has ears trained to recognize forbidden words. Faith, there's not just undesirable, it's dangerous. Being seen with a religious book, even by accident, can mean the end of a career, the loss of a home, a sudden disappearance. And because of that, many prefer to forget that they ever believed. Because remembering, in that place, is to risk everything. The signs of oppression are not only in prisons. They are in suspicious glances, in conversations that end before they begin, in doors that close without explanation. They are in the eyes of those who learn to pray only in thought, and to doubt their own faith, afraid of being noticed. There are no visible martyrs. Only ordinary people who have learned to hide their souls. The architecture is clean, orderly, predictable. Wide streets, red posters, state symbols. But all of that hides an invisible layer. Fear. Fear of speaking, fear asking, fear of remembering. Even the act of thinking differently seems dangerous. Religion, there is not a rejected idea. It's an invisible crime, a whispered risk, a gesture that could cost a life. Schools teach that faith is an illusion, that the only path is obedience, that there is no soul, only function. Children repeat these phrases naturally, but sometimes, when playing alone, they imitate gestures they should never have known. They cross their arms in a strange way, look to the sky as if waiting for something. And the adults pretend not to see, because correcting would also be dangerous. Everything there is regulated, even silence. In the markets, there is food, clothing, electronic devices, but no symbols. No cross pendants, no shirts with spiritual messages, no object that refers to the invisible. If someone asks for it, the vendor lowers their gaze, pretends not to understand, replies with something else. The absence of faith is in everything, even in what is not said. Some try to create secret spaces. Basements with candles, meetings. In remote forests, books copied by hand and hidden among supplies. But these places are fragile. One wrong step, an attentive neighbor, a noise at the wrong time, and everything ends. Not with alarm, just with disappearance. The person vanishes. And those who remain know better than to ask. On every commemorative date, the official channels reinforce national pride, the strength of the people, the greatness of the system. There are no religious holidays, no symbolic permissions. The sacred days of other peoples, there, are treated as threats to social balance. The calendar is political. Hope is state-owned. And the soul, if it exists, must hide even from itself. There are those who have never known another reality. Young people who grew up believing that spirituality is weakness, that praying is ridiculous, that feeling something beyond the body is the trait of an enemy of the nation. And even they sometimes, at night, feel a void they cannot name. There is no lack of food, no lack of shelter. What's missing is meaning. In the job line, it's common to be asked about loyalty to the system. There are forms that question participation in suspicious activities, and everyone knows what that means. A family gathering, a reading circle, a phrase outside the standard. Any deviation can cost not just a job, but the respect of the community. Because anyone who believes in something beyond the government is seen as a traitor. Fear crosses generations. There are grandparents who whisper old prayers to their grandchildren when they're alone, but who later deny it with hardened eyes if questioned. There are mothers who hide small symbols inside false walls. There are fathers who refuse to teach faith to their children, not out of lack of love, but out of excessive protection. The cult of personality is constant. The leader is treated as a deity, but only he may be worshipped. Any other object of adoration is considered deviation. That's why families have learned to separate what they think from what they say. They live in two worlds, the world of external obedience and internal resistance. In hospitals, it is not allowed to pray out loud. In prisons, religious books are confiscated. In some regions, merely possessing one is considered an act of subversion. And yet, copies survive. They circulate in secret, passed from hand to hand with fear and reverence. They are like fragments of something the state couldn't fully erase. There are people who believe that one day everything will change, that future generations will have the right to choose, but they say this only in thought, because even hope there is watched. And faith, when it exists, must be lived in the dark, not by choice, but by survival. The streets are silent even when they're crowded. Voices speak only what's necessary, and even the necessary is carefully chosen. Words with double meanings, mentions of hope, sacrifice, or redemption are avoided, not because they don't make sense, but because they make too much sense. In that place, vocabulary is also controlled, as if erasing words were the first step to erasing the thoughts they represent. Old habits have been replaced by new rituals. Candles are not lit for the dead, eyes are not closed in prayer, and no one looks to the sky for comfort. Instead, people learn to memorize official anthems, salute state symbols, repeat pre-written phrases with calculated enthusiasm. Faith has been replaced by public conviction, and any hesitation is suspicious. Inside the houses there is a parallel world, a world made of whispers, complicit glances, and disguised gestures. Many still keep small relics hidden, a torn page from a sacred book, a symbolic object tucked in the lining of a drawer, a memory told as if it were just another story. It's not much, but it's all they have. In schools, students are taught to identify religious behaviors. They are trained to report classmates and even family members who show signs of belief, all under the pretext of national protection. Many do it not out of malice, but out of fear. Others, out of blind loyalty. And some report out of anger. Anger from not understanding what they feel and needing to destroy what makes them question. Working in public positions requires a constant demonstration of loyalty to the regime. This includes participating in ideological events, swearing allegiance to the doctrines of the state, and above all, proving one has no connection to any faith. Even an old photo, a suspicious comment on social media, or a relative with a religious background can be enough to prevent a promotion or cause sudden dismissal. In weddings, there are no blessings, only records. There are no vows before something greater, only signatures before a system that regulates even love. And when children are born, there are no baptisms, no spiritual celebrations, only numeric records, codes, and obligations. Birth, there's not a miracle. It is a data point. In some neighborhoods, rumors circulate that there are secret places where people gather to pray. Abandoned warehouses, remote forests, silent basements. But no one knows for sure, or pretends not to know, because asking is already a risk. Knowing too much can cost more than living in voluntary ignorance. Punishments are not always official. Often, faith is crushed through exclusion. People lose the right to study, to work, to travel, to buy certain products. They are watched, isolated, silenced. The harshest punishment is not prison, it is erasure. Being treated as if one doesn't exist, or worse, as if one never did. There are reports of disappearances. People last seen reading a sacred text, or whispering a prayer in a corner, or refusing to repeat an imposed phrase. And then, nothing. No explanation. No answers. Just silence. And a new warning to the rest of the population. This is what happens. To those who believe in the invisible, children who show spiritual curiosity are redirected. Taken to ideological re-education programs, where they are taught that faith is a disease, that spirituality is weakness, that trusting in something beyond the state is a character flaw. Some return colder, others with dimmed eyes, and some don't return at all. They're sent to distant schools, from which nothing is heard again. The system prides itself on its order, its cleanliness, its efficiency. But that order is built on fear, on the suppression of the inner self, on the mutilation of the invisible. Religion was not defeated through argument, it was silenced with fear. Not because it lacked logic, but because it held too much power. Many have grown used to it. They say they don't miss it, that they never believed, that it's for the weak. They repeat these phrases with conviction. But at night, when they're alone, when the city seems suspended between time and emptiness, some close their eyes for 1 second longer. And in that silent gesture lives a scream the world does not hear. Young people are the hardest to control. Because even without knowing faith, they carry questions. Questions that find no answer in the propaganda-covered walls or in the official speeches. They don't know the name of what they feel, but they know something is missing. And some begin to search, in secret, in the underground of the internet. In the traces left by previous generations, the state responds with more rigidity. It blocks websites, monitors messages, infiltrates agents into universities. The goal is to cut off any root before it blooms. But it's not easy to contain the invisible, because the more it is forbidden, the more desire it creates. And desire, there is dangerous. There are no religious funerals, no farewell ceremonies. Only automatic cremations, silent burials, and brief notifications. Grief must be private, mourning rushed. There is no permission to say goodbye, much less to give thanks to what one believes exists beyond life. Even so, in some funerals, one notices a subtle gesture. A hand squeezing another tightly, a long gaze toward the horizon, a deeper sigh. These are small acts of resistance. Screams disguised as silence. Commerce is monitored. No store can sell religious items, not even from other cultures. Everything is considered ideological interference. And those who try to break the rule receive visits. There are no trials. Only indirect retaliation, loss of license difficulty. In acquiring goods, pressure on family members. Official celebrations are mandatory. Everyone must participate. There are audits that verify attendance, enthusiasm, involvement. One must smile, clap, applaud words that one doesn't feel. Because in that place, appearance is everything. And faith, if it exists, must wear a mask. There are those who remember before, when there was freedom, when one could kneel without fear. These people become dangerous, because they have memory. And where there is memory, there is resistance. That's why many prefer to forget. Because remembering too much is to live under constant tension. The media doesn't speak about faith, unless it's to condemn it. It shows images of other countries at war, associates religion with chaos, division, violence. It builds a narrative in which the sacred is always the villain, and the system, the savior. A lie repeated until it becomes the foundation of local reality. And even so, something remains. Something that cannot be measured, nor destroyed, nor erased. It's in the subtext, in the gestures that escape control, in the tears no one can explain, in the feeling that, even in that place where religion has been forbidden, the invisible still breathes, hidden, muffled, but alive. Some workers wake up every day before the sun rises, not because they believe there's something sacred in that hour, but because fear has taught them that being the first to arrive is a way to appear loyal. Those who stand out too much are viewed with suspicion, but so are those who seem inattentive. Faith, even when unspoken, has made everyone suspect. And everyone behaves as if they are being watched. Because they are. On public transportation, eyes meet only for a second. Smiles are rare. Silence fills the spaces as if it were an obligatory layer. No one comments on the news. No one shares stories. No one repeats old phrases. Even among acquaintances. There's a tension in the air, the fear that the other might report you. And sometimes, they actually might. Religion in that country wasn't just banned in legal texts. It was stripped from habits, memories, gestures. The mere act of showing deep compassion is already cause for alert. Any behavior that reveals hope outside the system is classified as a potential threat. That's why many learned to close off. They became precise, functional, dry. To survive means cutting off what's most human. In certain schools, older teachers still try to transmit values without mentioning religion. They speak of kindness as if it were civic behavior. They speak of forgiveness as if it were a social mechanism, but even that already raises suspicion. Government agents regularly visit classrooms, observe lessons, question students. Fear infiltrates even pedagogy. In the barracks, soldiers are trained not to believe in anything beyond force. Feelings are seen as weakness, beliefs as danger. Many of these soldiers were taken from homes where faith still whispered in the corners. They were sent far away, conditioned to obey, to forget. Some obey out of conviction. Others, out of trauma. And a few still pray in silence, even if they no longer know to whom. The surveillance system is sophisticated. Cameras on poles, listening devices in buildings, software that monitors keywords. Technology serves a single purpose: to ensure that no one thinks differently, that no one desires what is forbidden, that no one dreams of something greater than the state. Because dreaming, there, is also a risk. In hospitals, doctors are prohibited from offering spiritual comfort to patients. They cannot mention faith, much less suggest hope beyond physical treatment. If a patient speaks of God, the doctor pretends not to hear. If they ask for prayer, the nurse changes the subject. It's as if the end of life must be faced only as a statistic, never as a mystery. Death, there, has no place for the sacred. Despite this, there are nurses who learn to respond with their eyes. A longer hand touch, a respectful silence, a care that speaks more than words. Because even where religion has been forbidden, compassion insists on surviving. And in many cases, it is what carries what remains of faith within the cold walls of repression. Prisons are even darker places. Any spiritual material is considered contraband. If someone is caught with a handwritten verse, an old phrase scratched on a wall, or even a symbolic gesture, the punishment is immediate. Solitary confinement, deprivation, violence, and yet, even in there, some continue believing. Because there are things not even steel can crush. In rural areas, oversight is less intense. And because of that, spaces of resistance emerge. Small gatherings in distant shacks, evening meetings with just one lit candle, storytelling that disguises ancient parables. It's little, but it's real. There, in the midst of hard soil and calloused hands, faith still breathes like an ember that refuses to die, even without visible fire. Some artists try to keep disguised spirituality alive. They paint symbols that only trained eyes recognize. They combine colors with forgotten meanings. They create music that seems innocent but carries hidden messages in its harmonies. These are forms of aesthetic resistance. And even those are persecuted. The government constantly promotes campaigns against external influences. It shows documentaries that ridicule religions. It publishes texts in newspapers associating faith with backwardness, conflict, ignorance. They want to shape the narrative so that the population itself rejects what was once part of its identity. But collective memory is more stubborn than they expected. On special dates, families lock their doors and celebrate in silence. They cook traditional dishes, sing softly, light small candles hidden in dark jars. They don't speak of the reason. They don't call it a celebration, but they know what they're doing. And that is enough. For a few minutes, the invisible defeats oppression, even if discreetly. There are reports of people being arrested for smiling too much during mourning, for looking at the sky for too long, for placing their hands together in a suspicious way. In such places, even the body must lie. Faith, when not forbidden by the mouth, is censored through gestures. At universities, some groups try to discuss spirituality in an academic way. But topics must be previously approved, and any deviation becomes a scandal. A student can lose their scholarship just for citing a personal belief in an assignment. And professors, even the most experienced, know that some subjects cannot be touched. Not even in thought. On internal communication networks, hidden forums exist. Spaces where people share old religious texts, discuss forbidden concepts, recall lost prayers. These groups are constantly erased, but they always reappear. Like underground roots that cannot be fully uprooted, most live between two worlds. The external one, where they obey, and the internal one, where they resist. This duality consumes, exhausts, sickens, but it also protects. Because keeping spirituality alive in that place demands more than faith. It demands strategy. The system believes it has won. That it eradicated religion. That it replaced the soul with statistics. But the tallest walls do not stop thoughts. And the harshest prohibitions do not erase the need for meaning. No matter how hard they try, there are questions that refuse to be silenced. That's why there is always someone willing to try, to teach in secret, to gather in silence, to risk everything for a gesture that connects earth to sky. Because even where everything is forbidden, faith finds its way. Invisible, unsafe, but real. Some families have lived for generations pretending they don't believe in anything. They've learned to adapt customs, to reformulate gestures, to use neutral words. They replaced amen with thank you, prayer with positive thought. But deep down, each substituted word carries the pain of something that was torn away, not because it lost value, but because it became too dangerous to exist openly. Inside the homes, there are drawers that are never opened in front of visitors. Small compartments hidden behind furniture, inside upholstery, beneath floorboards. There lie fragments of a spirituality that survives like a war secret. They are not magical objects, but they are treated as if they were, because in that context, they represent more than faith. They represent identity. Even dreams are watched. In specialized schools, young people are indoctrinated to monitor their own thoughts, to suppress misaligned desires, to report sensations that may indicate spiritual fragility. Some learn to blame themselves for feeling, to distrust their own silence, to turn emotion into data. It is a pedagogy of dehumanization. Even amid all of that, unexpected gestures emerge. A janitor sweeping the floor of an abandoned warehouse finds a sheet with a handwritten verse. A woman leaves a piece of bread and a glass of water on a doorstep, without explanation, without a recipient. A boy draws a forbidden symbol in the margin of a notebook, then quickly erases it, as if it were a mistake. But it wasn't. In some regions, old accounts still circulate as urban legends. They speak of mysterious healings, of encounters with the sacred in dreams, of voices that speak in the wind. These are stories told cautiously, as if they were fiction. But those who listen closely sense what's underneath: longing and resistance. Mental health professionals face a dilemma. Many patients show symptoms of emptiness, anguish, depersonalization. But they cannot mention spirituality in their sessions. They cannot ask about beliefs, about meaning, about faith. They're limited to chemistry, to conduct, to what can be measured. And because of that, many fall ill in silence, not from lack of treatment, but from excess of prohibition. The forbidden faith gave rise to another faith, disguised faith. A faith without a name, that doesn't bow to dogmas, but insists on appearing in the most unlikely moments. When someone reaches out to a stranger. When someone chooses to remain silent so as not to hurt. When someone chooses to lose so as not to betray what they believe, even if they can't say it aloud. This faith is not taught, it is inherited. Through pain, the state keeps producing pamphlets, launches awareness campaigns, hosts conferences on the rational advancement of society. But the more it tries to erase spirituality, the more it hides in new, less predictable forms. There is something in the human soul that refuses to be shaped by decree. Visual artists continue to be watched. Painters who use colors associated with religious traditions are interrogated. Sculptors who work with circular or overly symmetrical shapes are questioned. Poets who speak of light, eternity, or emptiness are pressured to explain their metaphors. And even so, they keep creating. Because art, like faith, finds loopholes. Some community leaders host gatherings that resemble technical workshops. They bring people together to teach sewing, gardening, cooking. But in those spaces, conversations arise that stray from the expected. Someone speaks about forgiveness, another about repentance, another about starting over. And for a few minutes, the conversation becomes prayer, without anyone naming it as such. Persecution of religion has created a new kind of prayer, the one that doesn't use words. A lingering gaze, a respectful silence, a caring gesture in the midst of haste, a gentle refusal to participate in something that offends the conscience. These minimal actions sustain a spirituality that has adapted to terror. There's a generation that no longer knows the old names, has never heard of prophets, saints, spiritual masters. They grew up believing the state is everything, but even among them, questions arise. Discomforts emerge. Sensations surface that speeches do not explain. And these young people begin to search, not out of rebellion, but out of thirst. Religion, in that country, has become a whisper passed through generations. A code between grandparents and grandchildren, a lingering wink, a book hidden in the lining of clothing, a gesture inherited that no one quite knows where it came from, but that warms. Because even when everything is taken, the desire for connection remains. Some try to flee. They go to neighboring countries, attempt to cross borders, start from scratch in foreign lands just to believe freely. But not everyone succeeds, and even those who do carry scars. It takes time to relearn how to pray without fear, to look at the sky without guilt, to close the eyes without expecting to be watched. The population is divided between those who adapted and those who resist in silence. But even among the adapted, there are traces. There are memories that return in dreams. There are recollections that time has not managed to erase. Because the soul, when it feels, does not forget. There are places so clean, so organized, so efficient, and so empty. In that country, the absence of religion turned everything into calculation. Birth became a number. Love became a contract. Death became disposal. Life lost its brightness. And hope became taboo. Children learn early that certain questions should not be asked. You don't ask what comes after death. You don't ask why some people do good without receiving anything in return. You don't ask why the heart aches in. silence, these questions are seen as dangerous. And so, they're kept inside. But they remain, throbbing. Even in the courts, justice is cold. No one swears on any sacred book. No one speaks of conscience. Only of duty. But the eyes of some judges, when delivering sentences, carry a doubt that cannot be mentioned. Because even those who enforce the law know there is something beyond the law, and that the state does not control. Religion, even when forbidden, left scars. Entire neighborhoods where ancient temples were destroyed still have empty lots. No one builds there, as if the ground itself still holds something. As if the sacred refused to fully leave. Some say faith died there, but it's not true. It only changed shape. It became underground, symbolic, clandestine. It became silence. And in that silence, there still echoes a force the system does not understand. The fear continues, so does the surveillance. But there are moments, even if brief, when someone holds another's hand and feels something they can't explain. A warmth, a peace, a certainty beyond logic. And for a second, the world seems different. Not less harsh, but less empty. It is in those seconds that everything holds together. Not in grand declarations, not in temples, but in the invisible. That insists on breathing. Because where religion was forbidden, faith learned to disguise itself as humanity. On the last street of the last neighborhood, where the streetlights no longer shine brightly, there's a wall marked by old layers of paint. No one pays attention to it. But the elders know. There used to be a door there. Behind that door, before everything changed, there was a space where people gathered without needing to pretend they didn't feel. What remains is not the space. It's the echo. It's the memory that once there was a place where the soul could breathe out loud. New generations walk past that wall without noticing. They think it's just another forgotten wall. And maybe it is. Or maybe it's a scar. One of those that the body of the city carries in silence. Because even where forgetting is official policy, time insists on leaving traces. And sometimes, traces are all that remains. Some say faith is useless, that the modern world doesn't need it. That the body, reason, and order are enough. But those who have lived inside the emptiness left by the total absence of transcendence know that something is lost when you can no longer believe. The gesture is lost. The comfort is lost. The meaning is lost. And living without meaning is surviving in a rush, never really being present. At the central station, everyone walks fast. No one looks at each other. The announcements shout messages about productivity, progress, numbers. But between one step and the next, there are those who stop. Who take a deep breath. Who close their eyes for 2 seconds longer. Who, without knowing why, feel a longing for something they never had, or forgot they once did. And maybe that is faith trying to return. Religion, in that country, was not just forbidden. It was mutilated. Turned into something ridiculous, dangerous, subversive. But the sacred has never depended on authorization. It manifests where it's least expected. In a gesture of compassion. In a firm gaze that protects. In a silence that embraces. In a body that refuses to be just a gear. Even in the tallest buildings, even in the coldest offices, there are souls that, in their own way, continue believing. Not in temples, not in doctrines, but in the possibility that there is something more. And that something more is what prevents collapse. It's what keeps the human being standing, even when everything around him screams for him to kneel before the system. Public records do not hold traces of faith. They were all erased, burned, edited. But true history is not written only on paper. It is engraved in the memory of those who survived. And there are old people who can still recite entire verses, not because they want to convince anyone, but because forgetting would be killing one more part of themselves. Young people, in turn, slowly discover that they were not made just to repeat. Some write hidden texts, others record encrypted audio, others simply observe. But in all of them, there is a restlessness that the government cannot control. A void that obedience does not fill. A question that refuses to be silenced. No one talks about faith on the news. No one talks about the soul in universities. No one talks about mystery in the newspapers. But in the intervals between one announcement and another, between one class and another, between one ad and another, there are pauses, and in those pauses, spirituality breathes. Because what cannot be said finds shelter in the unsaid. You no longer see Bibles on shelves, nor rosaries, nor icons, nor makeshift altars. But sometimes, on a forgotten corner, someone draws a symbol in the dust with their finger and quickly erases it, as if killing the longing for something forbidden, as if visiting a place that exists only inside their own skin. The prisons remain full of both the guilty and the innocent. But there is a cell, according to stories, where someone writes every day on a wall that no longer has space. They write without a pencil, with their fingernail, just to not forget. No one knows who it is. No one knows if they are still alive. But the guards don't erase it, because they too feel there are things the regime cannot silence. In hospitals, when the pain intensifies and science fails, many patients ask for silence, not because they want to rest, but because they want to pray, even if they don't know how, even if they never learned, even if they never said it to anyone. There are prayers born out of despair, and those no decree can stop. The faith that survives there is not triumphant. It's not loud. It doesn't perform visible miracles, but it is the only thing left when everything else is taken. It manifests in the way a mother holds her child, even knowing she can't baptize them. In the way a father looks to the sky after silently burying a loved one. In the way an old man closes his eyes before sleeping and whispers something that no longer has a name. Religion may have been expelled from the buildings, but it still lives in the basements, in the shadows, in the subtext, in the intervals, and most of all, in the hearts. Because where there is pain, there is seeking. And where there is seeking, there is faith, even without words, even without permission. Some who escape try to tell the world what they saw, but few believe. The appearance of that country is organized, clean, functional. They say everything works there, that there are no crimes, that there are no religious conflicts, and it's true. There are no conflicts because there is only one side, and those who choose the other disappear. Fear is efficient. It silences, it conditions, it shapes, but it doesn't erase completely. What is believed in silence, what is kept hidden, what is transmitted with the eyes, all of that builds an invisible resistance. Stronger than any poster, hope there is not a shout. It's a restrained gesture, a steady gaze, a subtle refusal. It's the no hidden inside a yes. It's the flower that sprouts through a crack in the concrete, small, unprotected, but alive. And that is enough to disturb an entire system. One day, maybe, someone will be able to say out loud what today is only thought. Will be able to write what is only whispered. Will be able to teach what is only remembered. And when that day comes, those who survived in silence will have been the true temple, the true altar, the true miracle. For now, all that remains is to continue. Not out of revolt, but out of faith. A faith that cannot be explained, that is not displayed, that is not imposed, but that also does not die. If you've come this far, it's because, in some way, you also feel it, you also recognize it. You also remember. And even if you live far from this, even if you have freedom, you can still choose not to ignore. You can choose to hear what is being silenced. You can choose to see what is being hidden. You can simply choose not to forget. Because remembering, sometimes, is the most powerful form of resistance. If this story touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to understand what it means to live without being able to believe. And if you want to keep receiving truths like this one, you already know what to do. Because on this channel, you don't watch stories, you feel. You understand. You resist.